Congratulations to the grad kids.
The grad kids' parents or the grad kids?
Well, the parents. What a year for you, Mayor Stone.
Yeah, it's I just can't believe it's here after
We're live now.
3 years of COVID for kids. So they're graduating. That's great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for June 22nd, 2022. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize this meeting is taking place on various locations, remote and on site throughout Coast Salish territory. And I know we're also thankful to be here. And that brings us to a very important and momentous day yesterday across our region was Indigenous Peoples Day. In fact, all across Canada. And seeing the pictures and hearing the stories from around the region and across the country, it was really heartwarming to see the positive vibes that came at least out of our events yesterday, and seeing some of the events across the region recounted through the stories on social media and stuff. It was really heartwarming to see the progress and the resilience and strength and determination of all the First Nations within our region and across Canada. I know it's been a really difficult couple of years with the reckoning that we're really going through together on residential schools and the support that we offer to all of the nations within our region as we work through these issues. I know that we all continue to support our nations in moving forward, and we're all here to support them in as Roxanne, Chief Harris would say, in our territory and across, in a good way, that we're there for the support. To help go through these difficult times. But yesterday was really a beautiful celebration here in Ladysmith. We remarked on the challenges of the past, but also really focused on celebrating Indigenous culture, strength, and resilience, and really came together as a community yesterday. I've never seen so many people at an Indigenous Peoples Day event in our community. The entire Transfer Beach Park was filled with people and performers and people just being friends and laughing and celebrating and enjoying each other's company and sharing culture and stories. And sometimes it's a welcome respite from some of the really challenging issues that we continue to deal with. But I just wanted to raise my hands to everybody at this table. I know the strength of your support, and especially to all of our First Nations within the region who shared that day with us so gracefully through such a challenging time. So from me, and I know I share these feelings with all of you, I just like to say Haichka and Haitsepka to all of the nations within the region, and we're so thankful. With that, we'll get underway. Sorry, I don't have my names up on screen, and it's just Legislative Services, and I forgot your name, sir. Any changes to the agenda this morning?
No, Mr. Chair. It's Patrick Robbins.
Mr. Robbins. Okay, thank you. And I had that and I forgot it as soon as I looked at your square. So thank you for that. And so with no changes to the agenda, I'll ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved by Director Staples, almost said Councillor, but it would have been Mayor, and seconded by Director Marsh. All those in favor? None opposed. None opposed. Motion carries. Over to you, Mr. Robbins.
Mr. Chair, you have adoption of the minutes. M1, the minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting of June 8, 2022.
Thank you. If there's no errors or omissions, moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director McGonigal. All those in favor? And none opposed. That motion carries. Back to you, Mr. Robbins.
M2, the minutes from the Special Committee of the Whole meeting of June 9th, 2022.
If there are no errors or omissions, a motion to adopt those minutes. Moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director Toporowski. All those in favor? And none opposed. Motion carries. Back to you again, Mr. Robbins.
Seeing no business arising for the minutes, there is nobody in the boardroom, nor do we have any applications for public input period. There are no delegations, no correspondence, information. We go to Section 8, reports. R1, item R1 is a report from the manager of Cowichan Lake Recreation in regard to Honeymoon Bay Community Society, free use of hall space for the year spanning 2022-2023. There is a recommendation.
Thank you. I see the recommendation.
Speak to it if there's a seconder.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Smith. Back to you, Director Morrison.
Thank you. Of course, this is a busy time of year, and as noted in the staff report, a number of us weren't able to attend and make quorum for this commission meeting. This was a standard annual request from the Honeymoon Bay Community Society, but I would think that there's probably a like desire amongst the staff at Cowichan Lake Recreation to ensure that this committee and ultimately the board approves this. It's a true cooperative relationship that's actually helped to model the relationship over at my friend and Area I's community association. It's this really works and has really created a great sense of community. And as it stated in the staff report, if it wasn't for the great work of the volunteers in the Honeymoon Bay Community Society, there would be a lot less in the way of community events and activities going on in Honeymoon Bay. So I would ask all of my colleagues here to wholeheartedly endorse this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Back to you, Mr. Robbins.
The next item under reports, R2, is a report from the manager, Cowichan Lake Recreation, in regard to Yubo Community Association and the free use of the Yubo Hall during 2022-2023. There's a recommendation.
Thank you. As that's moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Morrison. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Back to you, Mr. Robbins.
Item R3 is a report from the manager, Cowichan Lake Recreation, in regard to, and forgive me for not knowing the pronunciation, Massachi Lake Post Office Agreement spanning 2022-2027, and there's a recommendation.
Thank you. And that's moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Kuhn, and you got the pronunciation pretty well perfectly, so good first shot. Any discussion? Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. And as you'd note in the staff report, we're not talking about huge sums of money, but the value of having our serviced post offices in the community halls, not just in Massachi Lake, but Honeymoon Bay creates a central meeting place, a hub in the community where neighbors can talk to neighbors and you know, local news and information can be transmitted. And as long as we can encourage Canada Post to keep these operations in place, I think that agreements like this are important to ensure that Canada Post gets the signals that we are, you know, interested in keeping these services in our community. And as it turns out, when I was at FCM in Regina, I happened to speak to the BC rep responsible for rural post offices, and they are under instruction right now to ensure that these small and remote community post offices remain in place, and we want to make sure that they're viable and they remain an important part of our community. So I would again hope that everyone will endorse this resolution and this contract. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I did see a few hands there. I believe I have Director Yanni DiNardo, Marsh, and Manhas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just thought that maybe we should read the resolutions. We didn't read the last two, but might be important for audience members. Thank you.
This was such a long one. I'll give it back to Mr. Robbins to read out the recommendation, and then we'll go to our speakers list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That it be recommended to the board on June 22nd, 2022, that the amended rental agreement between Canada Post and the CVRD for space in the foyer of Massachi Lake Hall for a term of 5 years commencing June 1st, 2022 and expiring May 31st, 2027 be approved. And further, that the board chair and corporate secretary be authorized to sign the agreement on behalf of the CRD. And 2, that an increase in rent for Canada Post for use of the foyer of the Massachi Lake Hall, and that the increase be included in the revised rental agreement and implemented as follows. $146.86 per month is the current rate, plus applicable taxes for the period covering June 1st, 2022 to August 31, 2022, to allow for a 3-month notice period. Thereafter, a yearly rental increase equal to the inflation rate, and that's the CPI for Victoria, plus 2% plus applicable taxes be approved.
Thank you. And that has been moved and seconded. And I had Director Manhas next. Director Marsh didn't want to get on there, so Director Manhas.
Thank you, Thank you, Director Stone. Will there be a cap on the amount of rent increase? Because if the CPI is 8%, we add another 2%, that's a 10% increase. I think that's quite a hefty increase. Even the provincial government right now is looking at residential rate increases to put a cap on that rather than say if the inflation rate is very high. So will that be taken into consideration, or is it set in stone that's going to be the inflation rate, the CPI plus 2%?
Through to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Director Manhas. So this agreement and rates have been negotiated between the Cowichan Lake Recreation Manager and the manager at the Messetchi Lake Post Office. If there's any concerns that are brought forward with rates, we'll certainly bring that back to the board for perhaps amendments. But this has been negotiated to date.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Moving on to R4, Mr. Robbins.
R4 is the report from the Environmental Services Division with regards to regional hydrometric and climatic monitoring strategy. There is a recommendation I can read out for you.
Please do.
That it be recommended to the board that the regional hydrometric, climatic, and monitoring strategy be approved and integrated into the 10-year work plan for the drinking water and watershed protection program for implementation.
Thank you. And I see we have Mr. Moore here. If there's any questions, Director Yanni DiNardo, are you moving that? Moved. Do we have seconder, Director Wilson? And to speak to it, Director Wilson.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I lost my pointer there for a minute. This is good news, this particular one, and I'm just looking to see if I can't see Miss Miller anywhere there. I'm assuming that she would be.
Mr. Moore is here, I believe, to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, Mr. Moore. Question for you. This is good news. I'm wondering how far this will extend to, and the same questions I always ask, and I need a definitive answer, please, how this will affect the monitoring of Aquifer 197 and the other aquifers down in the south, not just in the south, but throughout the CVRD. Are there any plans to extend the quality monitoring of the water supplies in those essential aquifers? Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you. Through the chair, the plan looks at the region as a whole. So definitely, we plan to extend monitoring so that we get a better picture of all the aquifers across the region. The work that McDonald Hydrology Consultants or Mac Hydro did for us was they essentially went through a four-phase process where they looked at all the existing monitoring stations and historic ones, and then they compared it with all the watersheds and aquifers across the region and did a gap assessment to look at where we have good data and where there's gaps in the data that's available. Some watersheds like the Cowichan have a lot of monitors on them, and some of the more remote ones have essentially none. So they've put forth a very detailed series of recommendations with site locations to monitor a bunch of different metrics. So groundwater wells is certainly one of them. We're also looking at lake levels and stream discharge, rainfall, and precipitation across the region. So if you'll look through the report, they identify specific groundwater wells and locations where there's opportunities for new ones. Some of these are, if there's an opportunity to reactivate a previously existing well, then that could be a really good option because that gives us the potential for a longer data record in that location. Sometimes that's not practical, so we'd look for other ones. We have been installing monitors in a number of our water supply wells for our drinking water supply system, so that's an easy one. Something else that we've been doing with some of our development permit applications is including a clause for a right-of-way so that we could, in the future, if we want to install a groundwater monitoring well at those locations. For example, we installed one of those in the park right adjacent to the Cook-Sila River a couple of years ago. That is giving us really valuable information on that aquifer. I don't have the specifics of every single recommended location at my fingertips, but there's detailed tables in the report with site recommendations, the equipment prioritization for that site, access that's required, and things like that.
That's great. And follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good information. Thank you, Mr. Moore. And I'm glad to see that this kind of thing is being taken very, very seriously now as we move ahead. I know all the information is there, but these questions are so that the answers are out there in the general public for those who have not had the time to read those reports. So the next question would be: this monitoring that is taking place, is it purely on levels, or is sampling and analysis taking place as well? The levels are important, of course they are, but if there are pollution aspects which are not being monitored, then the levels mean nothing. So is sampling and analysis taking place as well, please?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Wilson. We separately developed a surface water quality monitoring strategy, which was brought to the board in 2020. So that looks more at the quality side. This strategy is focused primarily on the water quantity. So as you've identified, another important aspect is the groundwater quality. So this doesn't have specific recommendations as to the quality. That's sort of a different procedure because that usually involves taking a sample and sending the sample off for analysis, whereas this is focused primarily on devices that can be installed within existing wells. There is opportunity, for example, to monitor temperature at these locations, which can give us some valuable information about groundwater recharge in those aquifers. But the quality is a piece that doesn't fit in exactly with this, but it is part of the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Plan, which identifies looking at water quality and water quantity across the region.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chair, one final follow-up, please, because there are some very worrying things here, especially with the mention of specific tests here. I would have thought that something of this magnitude throughout the area would include the quality testing and sampling. As I've said before, and I hate to repeat myself, but I'm going to. I don't care if we've got a bath full of water. If you can't use that water for anything, the data we're gathering doesn't really mean much. So is there any chance that we can now delve a bit deeper and start looking at the quality of what we've got and not the quantity? Because it is important. Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Director Wilson, I think that's a very valuable input and a next step within the program as we're looking at the work plan for the coming months and years. A priority will very likely be to develop a strategy specifically around the groundwater quality. Like I said, we're building the various pieces together, so it doesn't fit in with the overall quantity necessarily, but it's certainly very important and it is a missing piece at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moore. And can we concentrate more on the months rather than on the years, if we could, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that as a rhetorical question. I've got Director Marsh and then Director Martman, and if I've missed anywhere else, I've got Directors Nicholson and Morrison after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Moore. Nice to see you. Please tell me your daughter's not graduating this year, because that would make me feel ancient.
One more year.
Seriously? Holy man, time goes. I was in a kindergarten class helping with Mr. Moore's daughter, but I was joking. I thought really you were going to say, no, we got 10 years. Okay, my question to you, first of all, I want to acknowledge the fulsome membership of the technical advisory group. It was really nice to see all those groups that you had representative from so many groups, the Watershed Board, the First Nations, and so that's impressive. I wonder, Mr. Moore, do you have if was there any change in the snow pillow levels in 2022, or do you have that data yet?
Through the chair to Director Marsh, this year was quite an unusual year for the snowpack. Snowpack data that's collected by the province, and they report it out basically in real time on their website, and we do download the water and monitor that, or the levels, and monitor that. So we started out with a below average snowpack, but essentially at the time when the snowpack usually starts melting, it was still increasing. So at the present time, we are well above the normal snowpack. I don't have the exact number handy, but we're in very good shape in terms of snowpack this year, and the catalyst that's looking at controlling the weir is taking that into account in that they don't anticipate reducing the flows in the Cowichan River for some time, as there's still quite a bit of snowpack maintaining the lake levels.
Thank you. Quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. Is there any concern, Mr. Moore, that if we suddenly get hot temperatures, that there'll be flooding? And if so, where are the concerns, and how can we prepare?
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Marsh. We rarely get that kind of snowpack or snowmelt driven the spring freshet flooding here. Our flooding here is primarily driven by the winter storms, the atmospheric rivers, particularly when it's rain on snow. So I don't believe that there's any significant risk of flooding. We'll see higher than normal water levels, certainly well beyond what we expect for this time of year, but I don't believe there's a significant risk of any sort of serious flooding.
So our bonus is happy fish. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have Director Martman, Nicholson, and Morrison. One day of an in-person meeting. I can't find the mute button. Director Martman, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Moore, for the report and some of the explanations. I too have concerns around not just quantity but quality, but I am interested in the approach with the Cassidy Aquifer area and the watershed, because it overlaps into another regional district, and I don't see anything. I may have missed it in this report about a bioregional approach to that watershed and aquifer. Is there something that will be that you can state on that?
Mr. Moore?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Director Martman. We looked at the study area for this strategy, included all the watersheds where there's any portion of the watershed within the CVRD. So the Nanaimo River watershed was included, as were a number of the larger ones that overlap with the Capital Regional District. The approach that Mac Hydro is recommending is they took the watersheds and they did a cluster analysis to group them into watershed function groups. So the idea is that from a regional perspective, we want to make sure that we're monitoring each type of aquifer and watershed, but we don't necessarily have to have every kind of instrument in every single watershed. So a similar neighboring watershed could be used as a proxy for a particular one. In the case of aquifers, there's probably unique characteristics to certain aquifers where we would want to make sure that we're getting monitoring in those particular watersheds or aquifers. And they looked at factors such as the land use and the demand on the aquifers, as well as what existing monitoring is there within the aquifers. So they took a number of factors into account in coming up with these recommendations to try to give us the best overall picture of the watershed, as well as focusing on, if they had to choose between a couple of different watersheds for a recommendation, then focusing on the ones that have the highest pressures in terms of land use and development within those watersheds.
Follow-up?
Yes, thanks. I believe I'm going to get a report from the airport later this month on their well data. And I'm interested, is that something that you have access to or would want access to as well?
Mr. Moore?
Yes, through the chair to Director Markman. Yes, our the easiest way to collect data is to use data that is already being collected, especially if it's being collected by the province or federal government, where we know it's meeting all the data quality standards. So a big part of the strategy isn't just focused on installing new monitoring stations, but in identifying those partnerships with the other groups that are monitoring, so we can take that data, bring it into a system, and then part of the report focused on what is the data warehouse structure, so that we can bring in data both from our monitoring stations and partners monitoring stations into one centralized data warehouse, and then have systems to be able to make that data accessible to a variety of different users. So we looked at different use cases and came up with recommendations for a structure so that the data can be stored, quality checked, and is consistent, and then can be shared with whomever needs it.
And a final follow-up?
Final, if I may. Thank you for that. And I will forward that to you as I get it, when I get it. The other piece was sort of putting pieces of the puzzle together. Is we have an initiative here, a project to go forward called the bulk or community water well, or well water. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but as that gets put in place, I'm wondering if there's any advantage to talk with the engineering or utilities about what might be useful from your perspective as that gets put in place.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to Director Martman. Yes, I think that would be very valuable. We have been working closely with the Utilities Division throughout the development of this strategy. We've already installed monitors in a number of the existing wells. So going forward, we're looking precisely for those opportunities. If a new well is being installed, then is there an opportunity, if it's in an appropriate location, to install monitoring equipment at that location?
Thank you. Director Nicholson and then Director Morrison.
Thank you. This, of course, is super important work. And I guess what I'd like to explore with you are two things. One is the relationship and the partnership that we might have with the province, because I think my understanding is that the province would be, this is primarily their responsibility. So what we're finding is we don't have enough data that we have from the province and their monitoring. So we're trying to fill in the holes so that we can meet our needs. Is that correct?
Mr. Moore?
Yes, through the chair to Director Nicholson. There's definitely gaps in data. I think all the parties recognize that, and the province is working to expand their network as well. So we're working to partner with them. The example in the Cowichan, where we worked with them on installing several monitoring wells a couple of years ago. So quite often when we're securing a right of way to a property to potentially be able to install the well, it's likely that we might not be installing the well, but it's a good location for the province to be able to install a well, because then it's consistent with the rest of their monitoring.
Thank you. Follow up?
So I guess where I'm going with this is I'm wondering what kind of an agreement that we have with the province, because I would have thought that there would already be a data warehouse that was accessible by everyone and that had standards set that the province would be providing. And I guess I'm also wondering, how much does it cost to sink a monitoring well? And I don't want the CVRD to get into the position of having this becoming a big black hole, because it could certainly chew up a lot of our very limited drinking watershed protection dollars. And I don't see anything in the report that really gives me any information on where we're going financially with this in the future. So maybe you could speak to that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Nicholson. There's a number of aspects to that. From the financial perspective, we have in the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program budget for 2022, we do have a line item there for installing monitoring stations and a separate line there for monitoring. So we're starting to set up that budget, and going forward, we anticipate that the balance there will shift once we have the capital built out across the region as it's needed. We'll need to still be spending some money on ongoing monitoring. In terms of avoiding duplication, the province has a system called Aquarius, where a lot of their water-related data, both the hydrometric quantity data and the quality data, can feed into that system. We do have access to that system. A lot of it is publicly available already. So part of the system, when we set up a data warehouse structure, will be linking to that system and possibly even using the Aquarius system, our own installation of it. The exact technical details we haven't worked out yet, but that would be one option so that we can avoid the overlap. The thing is that at the moment, there's a lot of different stations out there that feed into different systems. So the provincial monitoring stations feed into the provincial system. The Water Survey of Canada monitors a lot of different gauges. Some of them go into other systems. We have our own ones right now. Some of them go into a system that Northwest Hydraulic Consultants has been maintaining for us. Things are kind of scattered. So what we're trying to do is bring it into one centralized data warehouse that brings the data that's needed together so that it's consistent and accessible as a big picture.
Follow up? I believe you're still muted, Director Nicholson.
Sorry. Can you give me an idea of the percentage of the drinking water watershed protection budget that would be spent on an ongoing basis on this? And how much does it cost to put in a monitoring well, roughly?
Go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Thank
I was
you.
giving you time to calculate it.
Through the chair to Director Nicholson. The station costs vary a fair bit, largely depending on access to the station in terms of monitoring. If there is if it's a really remote station, if we have to look at a satellite versus a cellular connection, that has impacts on costs. How frequently we can access the site. The snow pillows, for example, you generally need a helicopter flight to get up to check on them. Versus some of the in-stream stations, you can simply drive down there and walk and monitor them. The report does have a lot of the detailed recommendations. I'm just going to, detailed costs associated with it. I don't have that number right at my fingertips, but I'm just trying to pull it up here. I think with the last station that we put in was a very rough ballpark, was about $30,000 to install a station, and that includes the monitoring device, which is either a pressure transducer, which is mounted under the water, or else some of them are a look down, where you've got a radar device looking down and measuring the water level, and then it has to be connected to a telemetry device, so either a cellular or satellite modem to transmit that information. And then we also have to look at site hardening to prevent vandalism and theft from their sites, which in some locations, unfortunately, is an ongoing problem with associated costs.
Can I come back to you, Director Nicholson? I've got a long speakers list, but that might give time for staff to contemplate maybe more detail on the costs. I get the sense that go ahead.
It's not that I want the details on the cost. What I'm getting at is that we have a lot of pressures for a very limited budget. And so I am curious as to how much we intend to, and this is not work that local governments traditionally do. I am interested in understanding how much we expect to be focusing on this water quantity issue versus the water quality issue versus the other work that needs to happen in our watersheds to make them healthier. And I just don't have a good handle of that. Sorry.
Mr. Moore, can you help with that?
Through the chair to Director Nicholson, I don't have the drinking water and watershed protection budget in front of me at the moment. If I recall correctly, it was on the neighborhood of about $300,000 towards capital and $200,000 towards ongoing monitoring in the 2022 budget. But perhaps that is information that if we have some direction, we could come back to you with the details that you need.
Okay, thank you. I'll go through the speakers list, and then if there's a motion from the committee to request that information, we can get it back from staff. I have Directors Morrison, Acton, Smith, and Yanni DiNardo, I believe. And if I've missed anyone, please raise your hand. Director Morrison.
Thank you,
Brian.
Mr. Chair. Great report, read it start to finish, so thank you, Mr. Moore. And clearly, you know, I'm pleased to see that that staff is following the directions of the board, and I even think this got some mention in our corporate strategic plan and as some of what was important to this board and obviously to the community. And I think it's been acknowledged for quite some time that, well, this most of the responsibility of this lies with the province. This community and this region saw the monitoring and the understanding of what was going on, not just in our surface water, but our groundwater as a key priority in the region. And so, you know, this goes to the very notion of if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so good on staff for putting this together. I see this as a fairly monumental and intricate task to bring together all the different formats of monitoring that's going on and to bring them into one sort of central clearinghouse to make it available for people to use as in a good data form. But my question, and I do have another comment, but the end user is, you know, I monitor a number of different things around water. For instance, I just checked the snow pillow the other day, and you were pretty accurate in your description. Currently, as of a couple of days ago, we were at 100% of the average 100% measurement for snow up on the snow pillow. So that's great news. So we've got access, but some of these data sets are really quite complex to read and understand. I don't know if anybody's looked at the paper excellence reports on flows and the likes, and there's a lot of different lines and colors and graphs and the like, and they tend to be a little challenging. So question for you, Mr. Moore. Who's the anticipated end user, and I'm hoping it's not just scientists and water quantity geeks, and that if a member of the public wanted to access this on our website or another site, is it something that a member of our public can go on, look at, understand and make sense of, and because I think that's important if we're creating a system, that it should be usable not just to scientists and experts, but the general public if they find interest. So what can you tell me about the end user and the format that this will take when it's rolled out?
Mr. Moore.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Director Morrison. Great questions, and that was definitely something that we looked at in the recommendations for the data warehouse structure. So certainly, there's a wide range of potential use cases. We anticipate that staff will certainly want to make use of the data and potentially having access to the raw data to be able to really dig into it. And there's also, operators of other water systems within the region, agricultural users, and interested members of the public. So the recommendations that we're looking at for a data warehouse will be able to present the data in a number of different formats, so that there will be access both to raw data, potentially for download or whatever use, but also for some sort of reporting dashboard where the user will be able to pull out certain kinds of graphs or get information that has had some sort of analysis that's automatically applied as it goes through the dashboard to present a report. Part of the project team that was working on this was an outfit called Foundry Spatial, which has worked on this in other areas. There's a BC water dashboard. There's a number of examples that are out there. Some of them I believe are referenced in the report with some examples of what kind of reports there could be out there to try to make things a little more understandable, because obviously just presenting a raw number, it doesn't mean much without the context around it and how that compares to previous years and being able to look at trends. And other potential users. There are a lot of people within the public, within the region, we know, that are volunteering with the groups that have a very high degree of knowledge and skill in this field and can make use of the data.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I have no follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Acton, then Smith, Yanni DiNardo, and Director Harrison, and Director Wilson. We were almost at the end, but now we're at the beginning again.
I'm sorry I have no qualms with the report or anything, but I think, and I'm happy to see that there's progress happening with the watershed function, but can you explain kind of like in layman's terms how this information will be used for land development? Like essentially we're in the land use business, and we have a lot of pressures for development. How will this translate to that on the ground for the community?
Mr. Moore, go ahead. Just keep going ahead, and I don't need to say, Mr. Moore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Director Acton. I can speak to part of that, and I'm not sure if anyone from the development side has anything to add, but at the moment, one of the requirements of development is having some sort of proof of water, and right now, in a lot of cases, we don't have enough information to be able to make that determination. And I know the province was struggling with this. We heard from their authorization officers that they're being asked to make decisions on very limited information. So as we move forward and start to collect the data and can start to see trends emerging, then that will give us more information about water availability, and both in terms of is the water there and is it safe to drink, that can be used to guide those decisions. And I can't really speak to the specifics of how that gets included into the development.
Follow up?
Well, I guess maybe now is not the time to have that conversation, but I think it's important to understand how development services, like how it's all gonna work together and then be kind of like basic information for us, because some of it is just such a high level that it's not very usable. And then as well, to avoid decisions being made or applications coming through. Like I'm just wondering if there's plans for the CBRD to kind of incorporate environmental services more into the development application process. But anyway, that's maybe for another time.
And
Any comment? ahead,
through the
Mr. Moore.
chair to Director Acton, I would have to defer those kind of questions to senior management.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the next speakers, Director Smith, Yandy DiNardo, Alternate Director Harrison, and then Director Wilson. So, Director Smith.
Thank you. It was an extremely interesting report. I have a question as the 9 Gulf Islands for Area G, where does that fit into something like this? And, you know, are they being included? Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Smith. Yes, we did include the Gulf Islands in the study area, and there are recommendations for monitoring on those islands.
Thank you. Any follow-up?
So currently there's no monitors on the islands, and you're looking for sites to put the monitors on, if that's doable. Is that what you're looking for? Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, there are recommendations for all the sites across the region. There's recommendations for specific sites. The basically the location, the property ownership and access agreements that might be required for that area. So we would look at that, and it might not end up being that exact site, but somewhere in that aquifer or watershed, we would want to look at that.
Thank you. Thank you. Director Yandy DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Moore. I just wanted to ask about, we have a local resident beside our Lambourne wells that has been monitoring his personal well for years. Would that be of value to you on this expedition here?
Through the chair to Director Yandy DiNardo, potentially. One of the things that Mac Hydro did look at as they're accumulating the data is these kinds of smaller, unique one-time data sets, and setting up a sort of a procedure to be able to evaluate the quality of that data and if it can be brought in. There's a huge range of historic data out there from both from the province, but also some agricultural and forestry sites and a number of citizen science-based ones as well. It's a matter of either being able to evaluate the quality and making a decision whether or not to include it, or to have a flag associated with the data as to the quality. In many cases, it could be very good data. Other times it may not be as useful, but it's definitely something that we would try to look at. Especially if it fills a gap where there's no other available information, then that could be potentially valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alternate Director Harrison. Welcome. I'm sorry I didn't welcome you at the beginning of the meeting. Go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. I'm getting to be a familiar face here, I'm sure. The question has to do with improvement districts, and just wondering where improvement districts fit into this regional program here. So what the coordination is and costs that may be covered by the region for an improvement district.
Thank you. Through the chair to Alternate Director Harrison. Several of the improvement districts did participate in the process as stakeholders, and we see them being both partners and potential users of the data, in terms that they often have very good long-term well records associated with their water supply systems, and they may likely be able to make use of the monitoring data as a similar way that we would with our utilities division in looking at water supply for our water systems.
Thank you. Thank you. Director Wilson, to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to kind of repeat myself, please, Mr. Moore, and when you're speaking to Miss Miller as well, if we can make a really big effort to try and include the quality and everything else that goes in here rather than just quantity, please make as much effort as you can to ensure that that is included. It is as important as everything else in there. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I see no other questions or comments. Mr. Robbins, it's been moved and seconded.
That's correct.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Moving on to R5, Mr. Robbins.
The final report from the
Mr.
general.
Chair, before we go on
Ian's
to the
waving
next
his
one.
hand there.
Pardon me, sorry. Mr. Director Morrison, sorry.
Yeah, I'd just like to move that staff prepare a report indicating a timeline for water quality monitoring and report back to the committee.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Director Wilson? I wasn't going to let anybody else take that. Sorry. Any other discussion, Director Nicholson?
Thank you. Well, maybe at the same time, we could have just a general update on this water and watershed protection function.
So do you want to make that as an amendment and include an update on the drinking water and watershed protection function?
Yeah, I would. I'd like to see sort of the whole picture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So that's a proposed amendment moved by Director Nicholson to include that as well, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Back to the motion as amended. So this is to get an overview of the drinking water and watershed protection and a report on timelines for quality monitoring in addition to the just passed motion on quantity monitoring. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. So back to R5 again, Mr. Robbins.
R5 is a report from the General Manager, Engineering Services Division. It's regard to the 2022 Strategic Priorities Fund grant application. There is a 4-part recommendation for the committee.
Thank you. Does the committee want it read out, or can we refer to our agenda packages? It is rather long. I do see Mr. Boyson's popped up from looking like maybe Italy or something, but well, it just looks too nice out there wherever you are, Mr. Boyson. But go ahead if you'd like to say anything, or the committee can ask the recommendation be read, or I can take a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm calling in today from Penticton from the Local Government Managers Association conference, and I hope it's as sunny down back home. Yeah, I could just speak quickly to it. Is that for these grant applications, so the regional district was allowed to apply for 3 capital projects and 1 capacity building project. Our senior management team went through a process to review the potential projects, and we identified these as priority projects. So we've been discussing a few of these projects previously with you, including the Stocking Lake Dam discussion from last week. And so, yeah, we've got staff available to answer questions about some of the specifics around each of the grant applications. The application is due at the end of the month. And we are requesting that also if the committee is comfortable with taking it to the board this afternoon, we'd like to do it for the grant application process to move along, but also the board support for these grant applications can come in after the due date. So if there's any concerns or any further information that's needed. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll let and our staff is around, and I'm also available for questions.
Thank you. And just for the public and for you, Mr. Boyson, I did know you were at the conference. I just saw the backdrop and thought it looked too nice. So I know you're working. I did see Director Yanni DiNardo's hand and Director Smith's hands, but I'm not sure if that was a motion or questions.
It was a motion to move the recommendation.
Do we have a seconder for that? Director Marsh, and I saw Director Smith's hand to speak to it. Director Smith.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask this question again to Mr. Boyson. He knows I've had huge lists and he's worked through them diligently, but I still have a couple of them that I would like to ask. And it would be the road preparation to the site, how is that going to be funded? Is it included in the grant application, the site road access?
Is this for the Stalking Lake project?
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
Mr. Boyson.
Yes, through the chair to Director Smith. Yes, so any upgrades to the roads would be included as a part of the grant application. I've confirmed that.
And also, one more follow-up. Were you able to sort out who will own the land under the flooded area, whether it will be CVRD land?
The land where the increase is for the so that those rights should remain the same. Whoever is in those areas and still remain the same. So I don't have the direct answer there. Perhaps I'm not sure if one of my staff is on the call, but I don't think there's anything there nothing that would change with land rights with the increase in the height.
Okay, I was just curious as to whether it's CVRD land or if it's part of the CVRD town of Ladysmith Park area, or if it moved into the Crown land there. There's quite a few different connections in there, and I'm not really sure, looking at the pictures that I've seen, where it's going to actually cover. So we can do a follow-up on that later. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on these? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. And so that takes us, I believe, Mr. Robbins. Thank you, Mr. Boyson, for coming in from your conference. And we'll see you soon. Mr. Robbins, back to you for any other items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are no other items under unfinished business, new business. There's no one here for question period or applied for question period. There is no closed session. You're just at adjournment.
Thank you. So I'll take a motion to adjourn. Moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. I just love saying the name. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? None opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you. And we're all back at, I believe, 1:30 for board. Chair Yanni DiNardo.